News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
It's 9:30 on Tuesday, the 17th of October. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with me, Bev Turner, and Emily Carver this morning.
It is now humanitarian crisis. More than 2,750 people in Gaza have been killed in retaliatory strikes by Israel. It's also blocking fuel, water, food and medical supplies from entering the territory. The UN is deep in negotiations to get the first aid into Gaza.
Joe Biden to visit Israel. The US president is going tomorrow to reaffirm US solidarity and negotiate an opening of the border to get civilians out and aid in.
7 Brits dead, 9 missing. As the war continues, British citizens continue to be caught in the conflict, and it's just been confirmed a 13-year-old British girl missing in the Hamas attack has been confirmed dead.
A terrorist shot dead. The man believed to be responsible for killing 2 Swedish people in Brussels last night, in which he claims he was inspired by the Islamic State group, has been shot dead in a cafe this morning. Should we be worried about further terrorism in Europe?
And could we see a rare red weather warning, which means a danger to life? Storm Babet is set to hit the UK tomorrow, but should we take these warnings? We'll debate that.
Let us know your thoughts this morning. gbviews@gbnews.com is the email address, as always. First, though, with the very latest headlines, it's Aaron Armstrong.
Hi there, it's 9:31. Good morning to you. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB Newsroom. At least 49 people have been killed by Israeli airstrikes in southern Gaza overnight. Palestinian authorities say the attacks took place in Yunus Khan and at the Rafah border crossing, where the Israeli military have told civilians to take refuge. Israel believes 600,000 residents have now left northern Gaza ahead of what it says will be enhanced military operations in the coming days. The US President Joe Biden will land in Tel Aviv tomorrow to show support for Israel. He's also expected to meet Arab leaders in an effort to prevent a wider conflict developing in the region. Iran has threatened to take preemptive action against Israel in the coming hours. Meanwhile, dozens of trucks carrying aid are waiting at the Rafah crossing in southern Gaza as diplomatic efforts to get people out and to get humanitarian aid in continue. Egypt, which controls the crossing, has blamed Israel for not cooperating. If a window can be agreed, it's understood that only foreign nationals and Gazans with dual nationality will be allowed to leave. Police in Brussels have shot dead a gunman suspected of killing 2 Swedish people last night. It happened ahead of an international football match between Belgium and Sweden. A man who identified himself as a member of Islamic State claimed responsibility in a video posted online. Belgium's Interior Minister says it's good news the individual's been found. She's also confirmed the weapon believed to have been used has been recovered. Wages are now rising faster than prices for the first time in nearly 2 years. Average regular earnings increased 7.8% in the last 3 months, with the 3 months to August. Chancellor Jeremy Hunt says it's good news. Inflation is falling and the government will continue to halve it. But the Labour Shadow Chancellor says the Conservatives are leaving working people worse off. More on all of our stories on our website, gbnews.com. That's it for the moment. And now it's back to Emily and Bev.
Very good morning. It's 9:30. It's me and Emily this morning. Thank you for joining us. So more than 2,750 people in Gaza have been killed in retaliatory strikes by Israel. The Israeli military says that the targets are Hamas infrastructure, not civilians.
But this footage we're about to show you has been filmed by a Reuters cameraman, and it reveals the staggering devastation and loss of life in what were once streets, a market and a refugee camp inside Gaza.
That's right. Well, for those of you who are listening on the radio, you are being spared some of the most astonishing pictures of absolute devastation. We're looking at the framework of buildings which remain after the insides of these properties have been completely obliterated. I don't know about you, Emily, but I'm always surprised when you see people walking around. We're seeing some people in the images now. You've got wire cables coming from the centre of what remains of buildings. One gentleman walking along with a sort of basket on his head, I imagine trying to scavenge for anything that might be retrievable from these pictures.
In the distance, you've got plumes of what appears to be smoke. There's a massive plume there of dark smoke billowing into the sky. It's just a scene of destruction. Fire in the corners of the buildings there, and total destruction.
Total devastation. Just a ghost town remains after these sorts of attacks, which have just obliterated entire communities. Well, US President Joe Biden will visit the Middle East on Wednesday.
Yes, the US administration is heavily pushing for an opening of the Egypt-Gaza border. That's to allow international citizens out and aid in.
Well, Charlie Peters joins us now from the ground in Tel Aviv. Good morning, Charlie. How are you coping out there? How are you bearing up, and what's the very latest?
Well, central Tel Aviv came under heavy rocket attack yesterday. There were 5 evacuations while we were reporting on the ground, especially while we were in a medical centre, 2 in short turnaround there, where we had to see people rushing around the hospital to seek shelter, even serving IDF soldiers returning from the front line, then kind of limping towards the shelters around them. But the situation in central Tel Aviv, dangerous as it is in relative safety in comparison to those in the north and the south. Just in the last hour, we've had reports from the border region of Metula, a small town there, right in the tip of Israel's northern region, where there has been anti-tank guided missile attacks, the IDF claim, from Lebanese Hezbollah. The IDF say that they have returned fire on the point of origin of that attack with artillery fire, and this represents an escalation in that northern region over the last 72 hours. Last night, the IDF said that they had also drone striked a set of Hezbollah terrorists, what they said were members of that group, planting an explosive device on the border. And this comes as last night Iran's foreign minister said that Iran and its proxies were ready to take preemptive action within hours if the situation in Gaza continues. They said that they would not be able to stand by while they accused Benjamin Netanyahu of committing war crimes in Gaza. He said also that all of Iran's proxies in the region, he referred to them as the resistance, were ready and standing by. So that particular region in the north certainly gaining more attention, and almost certainly will become a proper front in this war should that region in the south become worse and that land invasion occur. But of course, we do have US President Joe Biden's visit tomorrow. It's a realistic possibility that the Israelis will reduce their bombardments of Gaza and hold off on any potential plans to attack while he is here to conduct what is likely to be some urgent humanitarian diplomacy, meeting also with leaders in Jordan and Egypt and the Palestinian Authority to try and secure further humanitarian aid in the south. But I think what we're also going to see is that every single foreign leader who's come here has been forced to run into shelter. We saw our own Foreign Secretary James Cleverly running into a shelter in southern Israel. Antony Blinken did the same. And I think that the militants in Gaza and also those in the north will like to see footage of President Joe Biden, of course, in later age now, forced to run away from and take shelter from those strikes that they are conducting on Israel day and night.
Now, Charlie, Washington is also trying to rally Arab states to help head off what could be a wider regional war. I understand Joe Biden is also visiting Jordan.
That's right, yes. Well, Abdullah, the king there, has been instrumental in securing further diplomacy for humanitarian situations in the last 72 hours. When he met with Prime Minister Rishi Sunak in number 10 Downing Street on Sunday, he described the blockade as a war crime. And the next day, Rishi Sunak did phone the president of the Palestinian Authority. So Jordan, I think, has an underrated role in the humanitarian situation here. We haven't had much conversation about the role it's playing. It has a crucial oversight of the situation in Jerusalem and is also a sort of halfway house between the Western powers, particularly the US, and those other Arab states. It is a close ally of the United Kingdom and the US and has access to people in the Middle East that most diplomatic relations in the West just wouldn't be able to achieve so easily. But that will be particularly an urgent need, that humanitarian diplomacy, as the situation in southern Gaza disintegrates into mayhem. 49 people reportedly killed in Israeli airstrikes on the southern city of Yunus Khan overnight. And this comes as people in North Gaza are being told by the Israelis, you have to flee south. But at the same time, they are reportedly striking the south, asking people to flee into an area where they are putting bombs on the ground. So US Secretary of State Antony Blinken, when he was here last week, one of his goals was to secure humanitarian safe zones in the south. But so long as bombardments continue and water supplies are cut off and humanitarian aid cannot cross in from the Egyptian side, it seems unlikely that civilians will be safe as they are forced to flee towards that crossing.
We were seeing the pictures yesterday, Charlie, of people amassing at the border at Rafah, with the border with Egypt. Do we have any news on whether that border might be opened to allow people to escape?
Well, there have been several times now that the US State Department has claimed that the Rafah crossing is expected to open, and on every single time that opening has not occurred. In fact, we've seen the situation declining in another direction. Yesterday, last night, while we were reporting from the Sheba Medical Center, reports came to us that shelling had actually landed around the border crossing. The Hamas-affiliated radio station in southern Gaza claimed that the Israelis launched that attack. They have, of course, denied it. We don't know who committed that shelling on the region. Unverified reports at this moment on who conducted that attack. But, you know, as many people are talking about that crossing opening and many foreign nationals move to try and attempt to get out of the Gaza Strip, a battle zone that is becoming intolerable, according to the UN. It does seem as though that any hopes of it opening are diminishing, and that will be a key reason for US President Joe Biden's visit. It is a key part of this American diplomacy, getting foreign nationals out of the Gaza Strip and providing aid to those who have to remain.
OK, thank you, Charlie. We'll be going back to Charlie throughout the morning there in Tel Aviv. So, police in Brussels have shot a man expected to be the gunman who killed 2 Swedish nationals on Monday evening.
Yes, local media reported the man was shot in a cafe this morning.
Brussels has been on its highest terror alert after Monday's attack.
So a question, really, should we be worried about more terror attacks in Europe?
Major General Chip Chapman is the former head of counter-terrorism at the Ministry of Defence and Middle East expert, and I'm delighted to say joins us now. Good to see you, Chip. Should we be more worried at the moment about terrorism here in the UK?
Well, let's separate two things. Firstly, in the UK, the threat level, as I think Mark said earlier, is substantial. If it were to rise to severe, that would be because JTAC takes the view that there is enough background noise to mean that we need more protective security measures and to go to severe. And the last time we did that, actually, was in November 21, based on 2 attacks in Europe. And we've seen at least 2 attacks in Europe in the last week, the one in France, in Arras, and the one yesterday in Belgium. Now, the tempo of those attacks in Europe is also unusual in terms of the statistics. So the Europol organisation gives you the stats on year. Last year, there were 4 people killed in terrorist attacks in Europe. 2 were from jihadists and 2 were from right wing. We've seen 3 people killed in the last week. So that's a spike.
This attack in Brussels, horrific, but it's not that unusual in Belgium. 2018. Prisoner stabbed 2 female police officers. IS claimed responsibility. 2016, suicide bombers attacked a metro station, airport, also claimed by IS. That killed 32 people. 2014, the Jewish Museum of Belgium was targeted when a gunman opened fire. 3 people dead there, and a 4th died due to injuries. This is becoming, I don't want to say commonplace, but it's becoming more and more frequent, is it not?
No, so you're using an availability heuristic because you recognise terrorist attacks which kill lots of people. You think they're prevalent on a year-on-year basis. In fact, since the height of IS, most terrorist attacks in Europe have been going down. That doesn't mean that we should be complacent, and that's why, for example, the Belgian authorities have raised their alert level to the top level, as the French have done so. But you've got to be very, very careful on the statistics. So most of the attacks in Europe last year, there were 28 what they call failed, foiled or completed attacks in 7 countries. Most of those were actually by left-wing and anarchists. They weren't jihadists. 6 of those 28 were jihadists.
We're learning more about the suspect. Now, the Prime Minister, Alexander De Croo, earlier, he said the suspect was a man of Tunisian origin who had been living in the country illegally. The Justice Minister said he unsuccessfully sought asylum in Belgium in November 2019. This often seems to be the case in Europe, that these people who go on to commit terrorist attacks are already known by the authorities.
That's right. It's not actually a very good nomenclature, though, to say that people are known to authorities. So everyone who's actually been to prison for any offence is known to authorities. It's where they would be positioned on the priority grid, the prioritisation grid, in terms of counter-terrorism. There is an issue, of course, of someone who's failed as an asylum seeker being then deported, and that's exactly what we saw was the problem, for example, in the Liverpool bombing in November 21, which the recent report actually said that it wasn't a terrorist attack, it was really more to do with grievances on immigration. But we need to have a robust regime which takes those people out quickly.
I'm interested to hear you say, Chip, about the fact that these terrorist attacks have actually reduced in frequency. Why?
Because there's no real nostalgia for IS, neither is there nostalgia for AQ. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't going to be attacks in the future and in the near future if Israel goes into Gaza, and that is because you have to look at what powers these sort of events. And its first one is a grievance, the second one is an ideology, and it's actually been rare for IS in recent attacks to be the named group, and that was the named group last night in Belgium. So I'm sure that there will be more attacks if Israel goes into Gaza, and we will be raising the threat level in the UK.
But you think they might be more what we might call a lone operative as opposed to somebody that has got a big organisation behind them?
Yeah, so you have to separate then again both how the execution of these attacks takes place. So most of the attacks that we've seen taken place are those which, it's tragic, but don't kill many people. So bladed weapon attacks are the prevalent attack at the moment in UK, because in the UK, certainly, to try and get together a sophisticated plot powered from abroad with complex weapons and complex explosives is something which the authorities, Counter-Terrorist Command, MI5, GCHQ, would probably find 99.99% of the time.
That's very reassuring for people, actually, that you say that. And when I said to you, why have these attacks gone down, I wondered to what extent it was that the ideology is weakening and that the cross-border ideologies network is weakening, but also whether it is the work of our counter-terrorism services, which you're then saying are doing a very good job.
They are, but you don't want to be complacent because, like everything, there are lots of metrics that you can measure things on. One of them is lethality. Not many people have been killed. But that doesn't mean the number of investigations is not still high. It is, over 800. It doesn't mean the subjects of interest, those who are on the radar of Counter-Terrorist Command, is not high. It is. That's increasing. So, you know, you can choose what you want to look at.
But is it not harder to monitor almost these types of terror attacks where it is a lone operative who takes it upon themselves to, in whatever way, strike fear into the public? Because this is the problem. It can be a lone operative. There may not be many lethalities, but that doesn't stop the spread of fear, and that's the intention.
Of course it is. All terrorism is theatre, in a way, and fear is, that's the clues in the name, terrorism. It strikes terror in people.
We're looking at this is the shot on screen at the moment, and this is the suspect in those shootings last night in Belgium at the football match. Yet to be, I believe, named or 100% confirmed, but that we believe, I think, Chip, that is the suspect.
Yeah, and I think some of the things that you'll see in the UK in the next week or so. So yesterday, for example, there were posters put up in some of the underground stations for marches at the weekend from Hizb ut-Tahrir. Now, Hizb ut-Tahrir is an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood. Hamas is powered by originally the ideology of Muslim Brotherhood. One of the groups which split from Hizb ut-Tahrir was Al-Mujahirun Chowdhury, and we find in most of the terrorist attacks in UK, somewhere behind them is Chowdhury and Al-Mujahirun. Of course, they've been described, but they keep cropping up in different guises, and we're playing whack-a-mole with the ideology of Chowdhury and Al-Mujahirun.
Yeah, I think people are obviously fearful that foreign conflicts can play out in our country and that what's happening in Israel and Gaza will lead to more terror attacks. Let's hope not, but that is the fear.
Major General Chip Chapman, great to see you, former head of counter-terrorism. OK, the daughter of NHS fundraiser captain Sir Tom Moore is appealing today against an order to demolish an unauthorised spa block added onto a Captain Tom Foundation building in the grounds of her Bedfordshire home.
Yes, it comes as the Charity Commission continues its inquiry into the foundation's management and independence from Sir Tom's family and businesses. Ray Addison has the details for us.
It was April 2020, the height of the first COVID-19 lockdown, and a Second World War veteran was capturing the hearts of millions. Captain Tom Moore raised £38.9 million for the NHS by pledging to walk 100 laps of his garden before his 100th birthday. That July, after achieving the remarkable feat, he was rewarded with a knighthood from the late Queen. And when he died in February 2021, then Prime Minister Boris Johnson joined the nation to clap in celebration of his extraordinary life. But that wasn't the end of the story. Speaking at his funeral, his daughter Hannah Ingram Moore said she would continue what her father began through the Captain Tom Foundation.
What he did is he became a beacon of hope to the world. And, you know, he crossed the boundaries of gender, race, nationality, social status and age. Not many people have done that. So we guard the legacy with our lives.
However, it wasn't long before problems arose.
3, 2, 1, off you go.
Just 1 month after Captain Tom's death, the Charity Commission started reviewing the setup of the organisation. Then in June last year, after concerns about the charity's management and independence from Sir Tom's family and businesses, it launched an inquiry. Fresh controversy arose this summer when we learned that a Captain Tom Foundation building, built in the back garden of Mrs. Ingram Moore's own home, had had a spa pool added without planning permission. Central Bedfordshire Council ordered the spa building to be demolished, and the Captain Tom Foundation stopped taking money from donors. But Mrs. Ingram Moore is fighting back. Today she'll appeal the council's demolition order, arguing it had no grounds to refuse their retrospective application. However, the real test is still to come. Whether Ingram Moore wins or loses this hearing, all eyes will be on the outcome of the Charity Commission's inquiry. Because whatever you're trying to build, a spa or indeed a legacy, you must make sure everything's in order, or it could all come tumbling down. Ray Addison, GB News.
Keep your emails coming to us this morning, won't you? Emily and I are just looking at them, gbviews at gbnews.com. We've still got Chip Chapman with us here as well, and we don't want you to go, Chip, without reflecting a little bit on what is happening on the ground in Israel and Hamas. We talked about the potential terrorist risk here. You're going to be here with us as well for some of the morning. But right now, this morning, what do you think is the main area of interest in terms of military strategy?
Well, the main thing we worry about, I think, is obviously the conversion of military objectives into a political outcome, because all wars are political. And the key worry in terms of escalation, I think, is if Israel goes into the Gaza Strip, then there is a high probability, and I'm using that in intelligence yardstick terms, somewhere between 40 and 50% chance, that Hezbollah will get involved. Now, I think it was significant yesterday that 28 of the Israeli villages on the northern border were evacuated because we worry about the rockets from Hamas, but there are 150,000 rockets, including ballistic missiles from Hamas, and a lot of the Israeli integrated air defence system will be doing the hard yards against the ballistic missiles, protecting sites like the Dimona nuclear power site, the air bases of Israel and critical national infrastructure, and that leaves other areas open which can be hit. That's a big worry.
And just take me through these steps. We don't have a long, but as I say, you're here. If Hezbollah get involved, who else is then dragged into that in the Middle East?
Well, that depends really on the what the Americans do and what Americans support. There are people who hate Hamas, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain. They would like to see them destroyed because they would be destroyed by Hamas, given the theology of them.
OK. All right, Chip, you're going to stay with us to elucidate us a little bit more on that. Right, still to come, oil prices have surged since the start of the war. Will this threaten efforts to fight inflation? This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News, the People's Channel.
Morning, I'm Alex Deakin. This is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. For many, it's a fine day today, but the rest of this week looks very wet indeed, thanks to Storm Babet, pushing its way slowly northwards. Going to bring bands of heavy rain that become quite slow moving later this week, and the real threat of some flooding and disruption. So we do have a number of Met Office yellow warnings in place. See the Met Office website for the details of those. Back to the details of today's weather. As I said, for most, it's a fine day. Bit of a chilly start, touch of frost in places. Sunny spells for most of Scotland and northern England. Sunshine turning hazy, though, as the cloud thickens. Some patchy rain in the far southwest. Devon, Cornwall, Somerset, maybe Pembrokeshire as well. Some showers across the Northern Isles also. And a chilly feel as the breeze, particularly in the south, starts to strengthen. Could get quite blustery over parts of Wales and southwest England. And the rain tracking northwards could turn heavy tonight across parts of Northern Ireland and then work into western Scotland, and further showers will then start to develop across the south. And then generally tomorrow, a cloudy day with outbreaks of rain, certainly many central and western parts. Parts of the east may well stay dry, but the winds strengthening and that rain getting heavier and could cause some problems across parts of Northern Ireland, but later in the week across many parts of the UK. Temperatures, again, struggling in the mid-teens and feeling colder with the wind. Goodbye.
Right, up next, we will be speaking to GB News Home and Security Editor Mark White on the recent developments in the Israel-Hamas war and, of course, the terror attack in Brussels last night. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News, the People's Channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good morning, it's 10 a.m. on Tuesday the 17th of October. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with me, Emily Carver and Bev Turner.
Good morning, thank you for joining us. So, humanitarian crisis. More than 2,750 people in Gaza have been killed in retaliatory strikes by Israel, which is also blocking fuel, water, food and medical supplies from entering the territory. The UN is in deep negotiations to get the first aid into Gaza.
Joe Biden to visit Israel. The US president is going tomorrow to reaffirm US solidarity and negotiate an opening of the border to get civilians out and aid in.
7 Brits dead, 9 missing as the war continues. British citizens continue to be caught in the conflict, and it's just been confirmed that a 13-year-old British girl missing in the Hamas attack has been confirmed dead.
Terrorist shot dead. The man believed to be responsible for killing 2 Swedish people in Brussels last night, in which he claims he was inspired by the Islamic State group, has been shot dead in a cafe this morning. How worried should we be about further terrorism in Europe?
And could we see a rare red weather warning, which means a danger to life? Storm Babet is set to hit the UK tomorrow. But should we take these warnings seriously? We're going to be debating that. Let us know what you think about all of our stories this morning. gbviews@gbnews.com is the email address. We're going to have Mark White in the studio. We're going to have Chip Chapman still here with us. And we're going to be going live back to Israel, where Charlie Peters is reporting for GB News. First, though, your very latest news with Aaron Armstrong.
Very good morning to you. It's a minute past 10 here in the GB Newsroom. At least 49 people have been killed by Israeli airstrikes in southern Gaza overnight as aid agencies warn of an escalating humanitarian crisis. Palestinian authorities say the attacks took place in Yunus Khan and at the Rafah crossing, where the Israeli military have told civilians to take refuge. The World Health Organization says at least 2,800 people have been killed in Gaza and 11,000 injured, almost half are women and children. The UN says hospitals in Gaza are on the verge of collapse. Its aid workers are overwhelmed and supplies are running out as the Rafah border crossing to Egypt remains closed. Well, dozens of trucks carrying aid have been on their way to the Rafah crossing in southern Gaza as diplomatic efforts to get people out and humanitarian aid in continue. Egypt, which controls the crossings, blamed Israel for not cooperating. If a window can be agreed, only foreign nationals and Gazans who hold dual nationality will be able to leave. The crossing is the only access point to the enclave that's outside of Israel's control. Well, the US President Joe Biden will visit Israel tomorrow in a show of solidarity as fears grow the war in Gaza could engulf the Middle East. His visit was announced by the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken after several days of shuttle diplomacy in the region. Biden is expected to urge the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to minimise civilian casualties during any ground offensive and also to establish a humanitarian corridor out of Gaza. Biden will also meet Arab leaders in the region in an effort to stop the conflict from spreading. Iran has pledged to take preemptive action from the resistance front of its allies, which include the Hezbollah movement in Lebanon. 2 teenage sisters are amongst the British citizens still missing following Hamas's attacks on Israel. The girls, named only a 16-year-old Noya and 13-year-old Yahel, disappeared from their home in a kibbutz after it was stormed by terrorists. Their mother was killed in the attacks. The Prime Minister says at least 6 Britons were killed and a further 10 are missing. Rishi Sunak has called for the immediate release of some 200 hostages taken by Hamas. The Israeli journalist Yotam Confino told GB News about the hostage situation.
They are in a horrendous situation, most likely kept underground in tunnels by Hamas. That's at least what Israel estimates. So this hostage situation is it's really just another humanitarian catastrophe that develops at the same time as the atrocities also we see in Gaza, not deliberately committed by Israel. Israel says it's not targeting civilians, but we do see these ruins everywhere in Gaza. So these 2 situations are just simply horrific and not solved yet.
Police in Brussels have shot dead a gunman suspected of killing 2 Swedish people last night. It happened in the city centre ahead of Belgium's Euro 2024 qualifier against Sweden. The 45-year-old man identified himself as a member of Islamic State. He claimed responsibility in a video posted online. Belgium's Prime Minister has confirmed he was of Tunisian nationality and was living illegally in the country. Wages are now rising faster than prices for the first time in nearly 2 years. Average earnings increased by 7.8% in the 3 months to August. The Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, says it's good news inflation is falling, but the government will continue its bid to half inflation. Labour Shadow Chancellor, though, says the Conservatives are leaving working people worse off with low growth and high taxes. Rolls-Royce is planning to cut up to 2,500 jobs worldwide. The company says it aims to become a more streamlined and efficient business through the process. Rolls-Royce is also planning to remove duplication and deliver cost efficiencies. The organisation currently employs 42,000 people. About half of those are in the UK. A hearing against an order to demolish an unauthorised spa pool block at the home of Captain Sir Tom Moore's daughter is taking place later. Hannah Ingram Moore was granted permission to build a Captain Tom Foundation building in her home in Bedfordshire in 2021. The building was given the green light, but authorities refused a subsequent application in 2022 for a larger C-shaped building containing a spa pool. Central Bedfordshire Council said in July an enforcement notice requiring the demolition of the now authorised building has been issued. And yellow weather warnings for wind and rain are in place from tomorrow onwards ahead of the arrival of Storm Babet. It's the second named storm of the season. It will last until Saturday. The Met Office has warned of potential flooding, power cuts and travel disruption. The weather warning will cover much of Scotland, the eastern part of Northern Ireland, as well as the north and east of England. This is GB News on TV, on digital radio and on your smart speaker too. Just say play GB News. And now it's over to Emily and Bev.
Good morning, it's 10:06. Thank you for joining us on Britain's Newsroom this morning. So, what do we know so far? 7 Brits are dead and 9 are missing as the war continues in the Middle East.
Yes, British citizens continue to be caught in the conflict, and it has been confirmed that a 13-year-old British girl named Yahel, missing in the Hamas attack, has been confirmed dead. We understand 2 of her family members, too, are still missing. Her sister, only 16 years old, and her Israeli father, Eli, missing too. Shall we speak to Chip Chapman, who's still here with us? Extraordinarily concerning for those who have family and friends in Israel, those who have been taken hostage by Hamas. We now have this young girl confirmed dead. How is the situation as you see it in terms of getting those hostages back from within Gaza? A very difficult task.
Well, the Israeli War Cabinet has said there's 4 tasks. One of those tasks is getting the hostages back. The fact that they haven't done the ground invasion of Gaza yet is actually a good thing in terms of trying to do intelligence development to try and locate and find those hostages. And one of the things which happened overnight was the Israelis offering $250,000 for information from those who are in Gaza on tactical tip-offs, as it were, of where they are. So that's another string to the bow, because it'll also be technical and other human intelligence means to do that. Of course, it's worrying because the Israelis and hostages are a toxic mix. I mean, for example, one of the main leaders killed the other day was one of the 1,000 released for one Israeli soldier previously. And the history of hostages in Israel is such that, for example, Operation Thunder in 1976, 108 hostages released. It was Netanyahu's brother, Yoni Netanyahu, who was the only killed in action on that raid to secure them in Uganda.
This British family that we were just talking about, that Emily was just pointing out, Noya is the older daughter who's 16. Eli's the father. They are still missing, the family are reporting. The mother, Leanne, we know was killed in this attack on a particular kibbutz. And Yahel is the daughter, the 13-year-old, this beautiful young teenager, having her life stolen away from her on a peaceful Saturday in Israel. Do we know, Chip, how many other British people might have already lost their lives, that we're still going to find details emerging about?
I think you will find details emerging, because although it's now, almost 10 days on, it's often difficult to get true fidelity on these things. All death diminishes us on both sides, but it's difficult to find these. And there is a thing about non-combatant immunity where the very young, the very old, the sick and the infirm should be protected from war on both sides.
And of course, our Foreign Secretary was over in Israel a couple of days ago. There'll be lots of diplomatic work going on behind the scenes, won't there, in order to locate these hostages to locate people who are British in Israel who want to come back to Britain.
Yeah, I think the Qatari access is quite important here, their intercession as a sort of soft power to try and see if they can get leverage over Hamas, because some of the political leverage of Hamas actually is resident in Qatar. It might seem ludicrous given how many people have been killed. I think the diplomacy, certainly from the American side, I think is working quite well at the moment. It's behind the scenes. No one's calling overtly for X or Y. That might come if there's any movement tomorrow when Biden is in Israel. So I think you'll see on both sides, you'll see Hamas at the moment continuing with rocket fire. Of course, you'll see the Israeli going through their what we call joint prioritised target list of Hamas military and dual-use targets, but no overt invasion and no overt escalation from the northern border. That's within tolerance levels when you have the back and fro with a few rockets from Hezbollah at the moment.
What's the worst-case scenario here, Chip, for the British people? If you take this through various potential steps, I don't want to keep people awake at night, but it's the question, actually, that my children keep asking me. And they keep saying, is this going to land on our shores, Mummy? Like, is this coming here?
Well, some of it will come here in terms of increased threats, possibly increased terrorism. I don't want to overplay that because of the psychological fact of we call 2 things, the dread hazard and threat inflation. Your chances, Beverly, or Emily's chances of being killed in a terrorist attack are infinitesimally low. It's still terrible if such things happen. But the fracturing of societies with Jewish kids not being able to go to school, hate crimes and all that, that does fracture society, and that's not good for community cohesion for the future. And while this plays out, all those things will be exacerbated for the future.
Yeah, just division everywhere, it feels, doesn't it? I mean, I've seen, even on a personal level, I don't know about you both, but, friends here, groups of friends who've been united on all sorts of controversial issues for the last 3 or 4 years, suddenly splintering relationships based on this. There's almost no other issue which is as divisive as this, and it's brought about so many emotions, Chip, hasn't it, for people in this country over a dinner table.
That's right, and someone like me who's really an analyst doesn't look at it like that, which is why people often say I'm dispassionate. Of course I am, because it's Aristotle's modes of persuasion. All this stuff is based on pathos, emotion. That's not the way to look at an issue. It should be based on logos, logic, or ethos. I'm an expert, listen to what I'm saying, because I'm trying to tell you what the truth is in reality.
Well, this is when you talk about direct threat and the possibility of lethality is very low, people dying from terrorism very low, but for many people sitting at home, it is just the thought that there are people living in this country who wish us unwell and could be supportive of terrorist action even if they don't commit it or perpetrate it themselves. That is what is extremely uncomfortable for most people.
It is. All right, thank you, Chip. So police in Brussels have shot a man expected to be the gunman who killed 2 Swedish nationals on Monday evening.
Yes, local media reported the man was shot in a cafe this morning.
Brussels has been on its highest terror alert after Monday's attack.
So, shall we speak to Mark White, our Home and Security Editor, who is with us here. Now, Brussels has had a number of terrorist attacks over recent years, 2014, 2016, 2018. It was the metro attacks where I believe 32 people were killed in terror. Islamist terrorism is not new to Brussels.
No, it's grappled with an Islamist extremism problem for a number of years. In fact, the trial of those, or some of those connected to the attacks at Brussels Airport and the metro system in Brussels in 2016 just concluded in recent days with very significant jail terms handed down to 8 individuals involved in those attacks. And there has been real concern across Europe about the potential for a response to what is happening in the Middle East at the moment. We know that Al-Qaeda, for instance, has put out messages of support for Hamas. And this particular man, who has been named as Abdullah Salam Lassoud, had put out a video prior to this attack taking place, in which he said that he was carrying out this attack partly in revenge for the killing of a Palestinian teenager in the US in recent days, also pledging his support for ISIS, so-called Islamic State. You remember that terror group has been very significantly degraded by Western forces in Syria and Iraq over the last few years, as it rose to prominence and carried out lots of attacks, or at least attacks were carried out in its name in countries right across the world. And also this man suggesting that the terrorist attacks that were carried out were also in support of Allah. He said he was Allah's warrior. So there is concern. The Belgian authorities raised their terror threat level to its highest level in the capital, Brussels. It's still at the second highest level elsewhere in the country. And we know that France is on a heightened state of alert. Here, it's slightly different. We're at substantial, meaning that a terrorist attack is likely, but it's not at severe. It was lowered to substantial some time ago now, and it's really up to the Joint Terrorism Analysis Centre, JTAC, to determine whether that level should be increased. There is no indication as yet that they're going to do that.
What kind of things might inspire them to raise that threat level, Mark?
Well, this is all kinds of things that we are not privy to. It's all of the intelligence that is being assessed by the security agencies in conjunction with Counter-Terrorism Command across the UK counter-terrorism network. So, for instance, there is an incident that is being investigated by counter-terrorism police in Hartlepool, a fatal stabbing that took place in the early hours of Sunday morning, which a 70-year-old man was stabbed to death. Now, that will factor in. It's not formally been declared a terrorist incident as yet, but that kind of thing would potentially factor in really trying to determine whether the threat level should be raised or not.
I mean, Mark, the Justice Minister in Belgium, he says this suspect, unsuccessfully sought asylum in Belgium in November 2019, was known to the police in connection with people smuggling and illegal residents. Essentially, he was living in the country illegally, Tunisian origin. This seems to be the story time and time again when it comes to these lone operatives, these terrorist attacks in Europe. Known to the authorities, may even be here illegally.
Yeah, I mean, not in every case is it linked to asylum seekers, we've got to say, but there have been a number of recent incidents that have been linked to asylum seekers. This man, clearly there were efforts to try to remove him from Belgium when that application for asylum was turned down in 2019, but he disappeared. He was being investigated by authorities for links to people smuggling as well, but he disappeared from the day-to-day sight of the authorities. And this happens quite a lot. There is an issue as well with people who've been turned down for asylum, and even though they might be known to authorities, they appeal and then they reappeal each time an application is turned down, and they can be in the country sometimes for years after an asylum application has been turned down, and then they've gone on to commit serious
Can we bring
crimes.
in Chip? Well, Chip Chapman's still here. We can't have you here with your expertise as former head of counter-terrorism without bringing you into this conversation. When the counter-terrorism agencies, Chip, are looking at these individuals, how often is it, do you think, that somebody who is an illegal immigrant, who shouldn't be here as a refugee, is still carrying out those acts in relation to the ideology of a larger terrorist organisation? Or is it more of a petty grievance?
Well, it can be a grievance. I mean, the authorities, CTC, Counter-Terrorism Command, etc., follow the threat. They don't follow the ideology, and the threat can change on a weekly basis and is updated by the agencies on a weekly basis, not just the prioritisation grid of those they will intimately surveil, do intimate surveillance on, but also those who might go up the priority in terms of what was formerly a closed subject of interest becomes a subject of interest, and what was a subject of interest in a middle tier becomes a top tier. And that is largely based on the output of what they called an operational improvement reviews following the 2017 attacks, with a lot more supercomputing and machine learning, along with the tip-offs from the public, which are very, very important. So I think you'll see a lot more people, for example, appearing on the radar to go on the PREVENT programme, because if you are just have extreme views, you might need to be guided on the PREVENT programme. If you're already attack planning, you would go into the PURSUE element, i.e. to be looked at and to see if it meets the level of being arrested by Counter-Terrorism Command.
Fascinating. Right, thank you, gentlemen. Thank you so much for your expertise. Now, still to come, oil prices have risen since the start of the war between Israel and Hamas, which isn't exactly a surprise, but should we expect a similar economic fallout to that we saw after the invasion of Ukraine? Don't go anywhere. Liam Halligan's going to be here to explain it all. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to ordinary people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
Affects us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Very good morning. It's 10:24. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Emily Carver and Bev Turner. This morning.
Yes, so the Israel-Hamas conflict has also had an impact on the cost of oil, now hitting $90 a barrel. We've got live pictures here from Rafah in Gaza. What seems to be happening? Some kind of altercation, people being dragged through?
So we brought you the live footage of this yesterday. We had almost a static camera that we were bringing you with the footage of the Rafah border between Gaza and Egypt. Now, what we don't know, what we do know is that the border has not yet been open. What we don't know is what has happened here. There were reports earlier from Charlie Peters in Tel Aviv to say that he believed that there had been some bombing of that border where the people of Hamas were gathered trying to escape. We're seeing live pictures here. If you're listening on the radio, it's scenes of sort of chaos, people having their head in their hands, somebody being taken away on a stretcher, covered by a sheet at an emergency, I think you said emergency room on that wider shot would appeared to be a hospital. What we can presume is this is civilian injuries that we're witnessing here. This is live at Rafah in Gaza. As we said, that's the border with Egypt. People walking around looking dazed and confused. It seems to be the emergency room of maybe a local hospital there, suggesting that there might have been a missile strike, but as yet we do not know.
Right, well, yes, oil prices are up due to the conflict, hitting $90 a barrel. Iran, which supports Hamas, has warned that this is a war which, in Tehran's words, could be fought on other fronts.
Meanwhile, there are signs that wage growth is finally outstripping inflation here in the UK. So to talk us through it all is our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, to explain. I'm so glad you're here, Liam. This has been playing on my mind, and I'm sure it is with a lot of our viewers and listeners. What is this going to mean for our fuel prices this winter?
Well, fuel prices have already been going up very sharply over the summer, Bev, almost unnoticed by the mainstream media, but certainly noticed by people filling up their family cars and vans. Let's have a look at some of the numbers. So already oil prices have gone up from $70 a barrel to $90 a barrel since June. That's a very steep, almost 30% rise. Petrol has increased during this time from $1.47 to $1.56 a litre. Diesel up even more, as any van driver will tell you, from $1.45 to $1.62 on average so far in October. Why are oil prices going up? Oil prices aren't going up because the world economy is going gangbusters and people are demanding lots of oil. The world economy is slowing down. But oil prices are rising because the OPEC exporters cartel, that's a lot of mainly Arab countries led by the Saudis, they're working with the Russians, another major energy exporter, to deliberately restrict supply getting onto global markets to keep prices high. They make more money, they put pressure on the West, they're angry about the West's response to the war in Ukraine. And then on top of that, as you said, Emily, we've had this instability in the Middle East between Israel and Hamas. Now, where do the Iranians fit in? The Iranians said yesterday they could fight this war on other fronts. The Iranians control Hezbollah in Lebanon. They control Hamas. They also control the biggest global pinch point for oil in the world. This is the Persian Gulf. You can see Iran there to the north, Qatar, a massive gas exporter. You see the oil tankers there going through that very narrow part of the sea called the Straits of Hormuz from the Persian Gulf there. The Persian Gulf supplies around 20% of the world's oil and gas. Energy is absolutely crucial. And that Straits of Hormuz, that accounts for about 25% of the world's oil every single day goes through that little tiny gap in the sea and onto global markets, onto the Indian Ocean and onto global markets. Now, when Iran says we might now fight this war on other fronts, what Iran is saying, right, in no uncertain terms, is that they will mine the Straits of Hormuz. They will block the Straits of Hormuz. We know the American Navy fleet is in Bahrain. There could then be absolute escalation of this conflict because this is, in some ways, obviously tremendous, awful humanitarian disaster. We must keep our focus on that. But the economic implications of this will massively impact the West's response because there's a cost of living crisis. And in Western democracies, people are suffering with this cost of living crisis. Now, Iran knows that. And if Iran decides to block those Straits of Hormuz, it could literally... it could do massive damage to the global economy. The Americans don't want that to happen. And this kind of proxy war, if you like, with the Americans backing Israel and Iran backing Hamas, could then explode economically. For now, the oil markets are going up because of OPEC and because of fears. But if the Straits of Hormuz are blocked by the Iranians, and a lot of people in global oil markets are concerned that they will, then the economics of this could trump even the ghastly humanitarian issues that we're seeing on our screens.
Liam, are you saying a quarter of the world's global supply of oil could go?
Well, what I'm saying, Emily, because it's a fact, and it's been a fact for many years, the Persian Gulf is so crucial. It's how the Saudis get their oil out. It's how the Kuwaitis get their oil out. It's how, United Arab Emirates gets their oil out. It's how Qatar, one of the world's biggest natural gas exporters, gets its gas out. What I'm saying, because it's a fact, is that a quarter of the world's oil every day goes through that narrow gap, that pinch point of the global economy. That is the Adam's apple, the throat of the global economy. If the Iranians control that, OK, and if they choose to mine the Straits of Hormuz, I'm not saying it's going to happen, I'm saying the fear is there. If they choose to really get nasty in terms of supporting Hamas against Israel / the Americans as they see it, then we could have a severe escalation in fuel prices. People on, petrol could escalate. All kinds of energy prices could escalate. The cost of natural gas, where we heat our homes. Natural gas generates 40% of our electricity in this country. Natural gas is what kicks in when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine. Look, I'm not being alarmist here. I'm just telling you what I know is going on in global oil markets.
The consequences could be, well, tremendous.
Absolutely. And Liam brilliantly explained, as always. We didn't even get onto the issue with wages here, so I'm going to get you back in the rest of the show, so don't go anywhere. We've got a lot to talk about today. Still to come, Joe Biden is going to visit Israel. The US president is going tomorrow to reaffirm US solidarity and negotiate an opening of the border to get civilians out and aid in.
Free the elephants. Dame Joanna Lumley says the 50 elephants left in the UK's zoos should be freed. She's leading calls for a ban on the animals being kept in captivity in Britain.
And we're also going to be asking our military expert Chip Chapman about the possibility of the Straits of Hormuz being blocked by Iran. As Liam just explained, the implications of that would be huge. Don't go anywhere. All of that after your morning's news with Aaron.
It's 10:31. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB Newsroom. At least 49 people have been killed by Israeli airstrikes in southern Gaza overnight. Palestinian authorities say the attacks took place in Yunus Khan and at the Rafah crossing, where the Israeli militaries told civilians to take refuge. Israel believes 600,000 residents have now left northern Gaza ahead of what it says will be enhanced military operations in the coming days. The US President Joe Biden will land in Tel Aviv tomorrow to show support for Israel. He's also expected to meet Arab leaders in an effort to prevent a wider conflict in the region. Iran has threatened to take preemptive action against Israel in the coming hours. Dozens of trucks carrying aid are waiting at that Rafah crossing in southern Gaza as diplomatic efforts to get people out of the enclave and get humanitarian aid in continue. Egypt, which controls the crossings, blamed Israel for not cooperating. If a window can be agreed, it's understood only foreign nationals and Gazans who hold dual nationality will be able to leave. Police in Brussels have shot dead a gunman suspected of killing 2 Swedish people last night. It happened in the city centre ahead of Belgium's Euro 2020 qualifier against Sweden. The gunman, a 45-year-old Tunisian, claimed on social media he had acted in the name of Allah. Wages are now rising faster than prices for the first time in nearly 2 years. Average regular earnings increased 7.8% in the 3 months to August. The Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, says it's good news that inflation is falling and that the government will continue its bid to halve inflation. However, Labour's Shadow Chancellor says the Conservatives are leaving working people worse off because of low growth and high taxes. That is it for the moment. I'll be back with more at the top of the next hour or more on our website, gbnews.com.
For stunning gold and silver coins you'll always value, Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Here's a look at the markets today. The pound will buy you $1.2159, 1.1528 euros. The price of gold, £1,580 and 37 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100 is at 7,659 points.
Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Still to come, we're going to be talking to Liam Halligan about that issue that we were just discussing then, about your wages and the fact that they've gone up. This is actually a really, would you believe it, a good news story. Don't go anywhere. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app. and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
And Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good morning, it's 10:38. Thank you for joining us on GB News. So wages are now rising faster than prices for the first time in nearly 2 years.
Yes, average regular earnings increased 7.8% in the 3 months to August.
But Labour's Shadow Chancellor says that Conservatives are leaving working people worse off with low growth and high taxes. Liam Halligan has stayed with us because we couldn't let him leave without talking about this domestic issue. Liam, why have they gone up so much?
Yeah, thanks for the time to talk about this. I think this is absolutely core to what GB News viewers and listeners are interested in, yeah? Making ends meet, the cost of living, being able to put a roof over their heads and feed their families. So we learnt this morning from the Office for National Statistics that wages in the 3 months from June to August were up 7.8% on the same 3-month period last year. That's a very high increase, a historically high increase. And crucially, Bev and Emily, that's higher than the rate of inflation, which was 6.7% in August. So 6.7 versus 7.8. So in other words, real wages rose because wages grew faster than prices grew. Now, tomorrow, we get an inflation number. That's the crucial thing to determine the cost of living. At the moment, we know that inflation was 6.7% in August. We get the September number tomorrow. I'll be here bright and early at 7 a.m. to report it. Most economists are saying that the inflation number will come down a bit, but just a bit, maybe 6.6 or 6.5. If the inflation number goes up, then that will put pressure on the Bank of England to raise interest rates again for the 15th time.
This wage increase, is it partly because we've got a labour shortage? I saw a piece last week about the fact that a brickie can now earn £125,000 a year building houses easily. And is this partly a post-Brexit boom to the labour market? Because part of the reason for Brexit, some people voted because they wanted wages to be increased, particularly in the building sector.
Yeah, it's definitely true that since freedom of movement from the European Union stopped, it's been a lot harder for contractors to get labour, skilled tradesmen. You know, I'm from a long line of Irish builders. My family talks to me about this all the time. But also what we've seen is a lot of trade union pressure. A lot of this increase in wages, 7.8% June to August compared to the same period last year, is driven by these massive, well, these big public sector settlements, of course. So they're driving
within the NHS, largely.
Absolutely, and one-off payments to civil servants, sweeteners, maybe to get them back from pandemic working practices to actually come back to the office. But also there's lots of wage increases in the City of London. Some people will think, crikey, I'm not getting a 7.8% wage increase, and many people aren't, because that's an average number. And if lots of men and women in the city are getting even bigger wage rises, that means that other people are getting smaller wage rises.
this
prices.
excludes bonuses and things like
that. Yeah, it's 8.1% on bonus, yeah.
And you know, the government ministers have warned of some kind of wage price spiral. What do you say to people who say that? Because they used it in the context of not giving in to public sector demands.
Yeah, there has been a lot of pressure from trade unions, particularly in the public sector. You know, half of public sector workers are in a trade union. It's less than 20% of private sector workers, so they haven't got so much bargaining power. What private sector workers have got, if they've got skills, is leverage, though, as Bev says, because, you know, firms need them for their skills. It's worth saying that the Monetary Policy Committee next meets on the 2nd of November. That's just over 2 weeks' time. Interest rates are 5.25%. I should say to people who've got mortgages or personal loans that are on variable rates, Bev and Emily, that most people think in the markets that interest rates are going to go up again at some stage from 5.25% to 5.5% and then peak there. Whether or not that happens in early November really depends on tomorrow's inflation number.
Brilliant. And you will be here to tell us all about it, Liam Halligan, and you will need to be here at home to find out what it might mean for you. So, moving on, the UK is set to be battered by heavy rain and strong winds as Storm Babet arrives from Wednesday.
Just what we need. Could Storm Babet see the Met Office issue a red warning?
Well, joining us now to discuss this is Jim Dale, Senior Meteorologist at British Weather Services. Morning, Jim. Good to see you. What would make a storm qualify for this very rare red warning?
OK, so at the moment it's yellow, which is to be aware. It's not life-threatening. If it moves up in grade through amber into red, then yeah, there's an extreme risk to life. Now, I need to say to you, this is probably more of a rain event than it is a wind event. Yeah, the winds will be blowing up in the next 48 hours. And Babet is a slow fuse. It's not one that's going to sort of materialize in 5 minutes and suddenly you go from calm to storm. It's not like that. This is something that will make itself known over the 48-hour period. And the rain at the moment that is affecting Southern Ireland, counties Cork and Kerry and Waterford, that will transfer across to us during the course of this next 24 to 48 hours. But the main thing about the rainfall and where it's going, I think it's the western part of the country in the main, except this. As it intensifies and moves across Scotland into the Grampians, that lovely part of Scotland, alongside Angus and maybe northern Lothian areas, so Edinburgh to Dundee, if you like, and then the rural areas. That's when we're expecting this sort of totals to be in the region of 1 to 200 millimetres. In old money, that's 4 to 8 inches of rain. It's a couple of months worth of rain in a 48-hour period between roughly Wednesday afternoon into Friday morning. So that's the risk. I'm not sure it will reach red. But nonetheless, meteorologists like myself need to be aware and make people aware of the risks involved with this one.
Should we just get on with our daily lives, Jim, when the wind and rain comes, or should we all batten down the hatches and stay inside?
Yeah, it's one of those questions, isn't it, about warnings. Do we heed them or don't we heed them? Look, professionals give these warnings out for good reason. They're there. Look, if you don't want to take them, you don't take them and you take the risks. But, sometimes when you seek the expertise of experts and you don't follow their expertise, then you can find yourself in trouble. And I think the warnings are out there for good reason. So I think, look, Southeast England, East Anglia, that central southern part of England, I don't think they're going to go next 40 hours. You're going to think, what the hell's going on? There's no big storm, nothing going on, a bit of rain. So you might be right in that respect. But for those that are affected further west, further north, Northern Ireland and upwards and places like that, no, I think it is a warning. When you drive your car into heavy rain that's lying on the surface and what have you, it does take your steering away. There will be local and regionalised flooding in Scotland that will, and we've seen this in the past where, you wake up in the morning and your living room's underwater, that type of thing. So they're there for a good reason. And the Met Office were very quick at getting this one out. I applaud them for that. Often they're very late or not at all. But in this case, they give ample warning. This is on its way. Not today so much, but tomorrow, Thursday and Friday.
Okay, thank you, Jim. Jim Dale there, warning us of this. I recently got caught in a terrible storm in Cape Town.
Did you really?
Yeah, I did.
But it doesn't sound like he's anticipating much destruction.
No.
Not too much to fear here. We've got a few emails coming in saying, oh, I love a storm.
I know. I quite like a storm as long as I'm inside. I don't mind a storm, but I have to say, in Cape Town, I did nearly die. A tree fell down, a huge, enormous oak tree fell down and would have crushed our car if we'd driven forward instead of back. So, having been quite flippant about these things, I had a bit of a shot across my bows. Right, keep your messages coming this morning, gbviews@gbnews.com. Right, we are joined in the studio now by author and broadcaster Tonya Buxton and former Labour advisor and writer Starlet Maguire. Ladies, thank you so much for joining us. I think we want to turn first, actually, to the terrorist attack in Brussels last night. We're seeing some live pictures here. Our understanding is that the terrorist suspect was killed. The Belgian Justice Minister is saying that the attacker was known to the police. Scarlett, there was a terrible inevitability about this, given events at the weekend, wasn't there? We've sort of been on tenterhooks waiting for an Islamist attack in Europe. Only 2 people lost their lives in this situation. I say only, devastating for their families, and our sympathies go out to them. Are you more worried now off the back of events in the Middle East?
Yeah, I mean, of course, everybody is. I mean, this was a very strange attack, right? So apparently, the attacker was doing it because there was a 6-year-old Muslim boy who was killed in America because he was a Muslim, right? So the attacker did it because of that, and then killed 2 Swedish people. I mean, this is, it's very. So this wasn't an anti-Semitic attack, which is what one would have expected, and this is what was called a.
Well, he claimed in a video his allegiance to Islamic State.
Yes.
So I mean, if you are a supporter of Islamic State, you are an anti-Semite by definition.
But what I'm saying is, he didn't. The people who were killed were not Jews. I mean, this was just an attack.
It's war in the West, is it not?
It's yes. What I'm saying is, it's not anti-Semitic. That it was just, and I mean, it seems that these people. There was a football match going on, an international, and they were probably football supporters. I mean, this is an absolute tragedy.
Yeah, it is. And the tragedy, of course, started on October the 7th, Tonya, with those awful images of Hamas invading Israel and the peaceful, beautiful music festivals that were going on. Your thoughts?
My thoughts are, on Friday, I was supposed to be travelling on the Eurotunnel with my husband, and one of my daughters had an absolute fit about it. She was going mad because you're not travelling because there's going to be a day of jihad and they're going to go for the Eurotunnel. She was obsessed. I mean, hysterically obsessed.
Yeah.
We didn't go.
Yeah.
We didn't go, and this is the type of terror that is now gripping all of us. So, you know, when one of my children goes to go on the underground, my stomach clenches, because I think, and that's how we're feeling now. We're feeling that these attacks are going to start, and yes, some of them are going to be orchestrated, and some of them are going to be these complete loony nutters that are these lone wolves that go off and just kill people, like this guy did.
Yeah.
So this is what we have. I mean, it's nothing compared to what's going on in Israel at the moment. So we're living in terror.
But it's not even the number of casualties, the number of people killed in these terror attacks. It's, as you say, the atmosphere that brings, the fear it instills in people.
Yeah.
That's the whole point of these kind of lone terror attacks. You never know when one could strike.
Yeah.
And that's the fear.
I was also saying yesterday, Scarlett, actually, that for the first time this weekend just gone, I was very nervous about my teenagers going into central London to an event in Leicester Square, and they did go because I thought we can't live in terror, actually.
I know, listen, if it had been up to me, I would have gone. But when you see your child getting so upset about something, and we were both going as both her parents.
Yeah. Yeah, this is the problem, though, isn't it? That when events like this in the Middle East are also being played out on our streets here, that this ripple effect of this fear, and in fact, Chip Chapman was here and he called it dread hazard or threat inflation, 2 new terms that I learned this morning, that we have to keep things in proportion.
Now, I think it's really important. I mean, I think people who live in Jews who live in Jewish areas so that they can be identified. I think it's absolutely terrifying. I think if you're going to a Jewish school, but actually it's really tough on Muslims as well. I mean the amount of Islamophobia.
But Scarlett, can I just say something? Sorry to interrupt you, but you know, I live in a Jewish area, and those schools, these Jewish schools, have always had to have added security. They've always got security guards outside. Now, I don't see security guards outside mosques. I don't see Muslims having to fear for their children and for their lives. So we do have a problem in Britain with anti-Semitism, because otherwise they wouldn't have these security guards outside the schools, outside the temples. So there is something going on here.
No, we do have a problem with anti-Semitism, and one of the problems with anti-Semitism is that it comes from both sides. So the Islamic State, the completely mad Islamic people, but actually, you know, I mean, another growing problem is the alt-right, right? And they are white supremacist, anti-Semitic. I mean, so what I'm trying to say
Why are they a problem? Where are they a problem?
If you talk to counter-terrorism people, they are the ones that they are until this weekend.
Well, that was rubbish, though, wasn't it? We know that was rubbish. That was just us. They're trying not to be racist because you don't want to say that it's all Islamic terrorists.
It's really not.
But it is, because the numbers speak for themselves.
No, this really isn't true. It's the ones that are being caught. They are the anti. I mean, I've spoken to people who are at the top of counter-terrorism, and they are very, very worried about the alt-right, who are white supremacists. And what I'm saying is anti-Semitism is a real problem everywhere.
There is a far-right threat, but we do know that Islamism is still the top threat when it comes to terrorism in this country, unfortunately. And those are the facts as it stands. Of course, that could change. But you also have people on the far left who are also anti-Semitic. So it's this horrible collection.
I'm interested in that, Scarlett. Just elaborate on that a little bit for me, because what we are seeing in the Middle East and what we are seeing here is an Islamist problem with Jewish people, which far surely outweighs any kind of organisation of what we might deem to be the far right.
Well, actually, it's an Islamist problem with the West. I mean, ISIS never, you know, they're not picking on Jewish people. They will have anybody. I mean, as it was shown in Brussels, as far as we know, those two Swedes were not Jewish. They were Western, and that is the problem. I mean, that's the problem with radical Islam, is that it's against the West.
OK, thank you, ladies, for kicking us off. In the next few moments, we're going to go live to Tel Aviv with Charlie Peters. We're seeing live pictures there of southern Israel and the Gaza border. We are GB News, Britain's news channel. Don't go anywhere.
Alex Deakin here with your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. For many, a fine day today, but the weather is on the turn. Some very heavy rain heading our way later this week. It's also going to turn windy thanks to Storm Babet, working its way slowly northwards across the Bay of Biscay, really showing its hand tomorrow. But it's as it pushes further north during Wednesday night and Thursday, and then into Friday, that we're going to see some very heavy rain. And there are a number of Met Office warnings in force. Back to today, because, as I said, for many it's a fine day out there. The cloud very thick across southwest England and South Wales, and quite gusty winds developing too now across parts of Wales and southwest England. Later today we'll see some rain heading towards Northern Ireland. But for many it's dry, it's bright. Temperatures a little higher than yesterday, still on the cool side though, especially with those winds across the south and the west. They'll continue to strengthen a little this evening, and the rain will work its way for a time across parts of Northern Ireland. Nothing too heavy at this stage. For many elsewhere, it'll stay dry overnight. Those winds starting to pick up a little, coming in from the North Sea. And into Wednesday, we'll see those winds strengthening further. Still many eastern areas dry again tomorrow. Further west, though, that rain getting heavier and heavier as Storm Babet starts to influence things. Please do check out the Met Office website for the latest warnings and stay up to date through the next few days, because there's some very heavy rain on the way and some strong and gusty winds. Bye for now.
So early this morning, police in Brussels shot a man amidst a massive manhunt for a gunman who killed two Swedish nationals on Monday evening.
Yes, we'll bring you the latest from Brussels.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to ordinary people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affects us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m. Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Good morning, it's 11 o'clock on Tuesday, the 17th of October. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Bev Turner and Emily Carver.
It is. At least 6 Brits dead and 10 missing as the war continues. British citizens continue to be caught in the conflict. 2 British sisters are among the missing, with reports that the younger 13-year-old sibling has been killed.
Humanitarian crisis. More than 2,750 people in Gaza have been killed in retaliatory strikes by Israel, which is also blocking fuel, water, food and medical supplies from entering the territory. The UN is deep in negotiations to get the first aid into Gaza.
Joe Biden to visit Israel. The US president is going tomorrow to reaffirm US solidarity and negotiate an opening of the border to get civilians out and aid in.
And terrorist shot dead. The man believed to be responsible for killing 2 Swedish people in Brussels last night, in which he claims was inspired by the Islamic State group, has been shot dead in a cafe this morning. Should we be worried about further terrorism in Europe? Get in touch by email, gbviews@gbnews.com, as always. First, though, the very latest news headlines with Aaron Armstrong.
Good morning to you. It is 11:minutes. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB Newsroom. A British teenager who's been missing since last weekend's attacks by Hamas has been confirmed dead. 13-year-old Yahel, on the right of your picture, was killed when gunmen attacked her kibbutz on the 7th of October. Yahel was killed along with her mother, Liane, while her elder sister, Noya, and their father, Eli, are still missing. The Prime Minister has called for the immediate release of hostages. It's thought another 9 Britons are amongst some 200 people being held by Hamas. The Israeli journalist Yotam Confino says their outlook is bleak.
They are in a horrendous situation, most likely kept underground in tunnels by Hamas. That's at least what Israel estimates. So this hostage situation is it's really just another humanitarian catastrophe that develops at the same time as the atrocities also we see in Gaza, not deliberately committed by Israel. Israel says it's not targeting civilians, but we do see these ruins everywhere in Gaza. So these two situations are just simply horrific and not solved yet.
At least 49 people have been killed by Israeli airstrikes in southern Gaza overnight as aid agencies warn of an escalating humanitarian crisis. Palestinian authorities say the attacks took place in Yunus Khan and at the Rafah crossing, where the Israeli military has told civilians to take refuge. The World Health Organization says at least 2,800 people have now been killed in Gaza, with 11,000 injured, almost half women and children. The UN says hospitals there are on the verge of collapse. Its aid workers are overwhelmed and supplies are running out as the Rafah crossing to Egypt remains closed, although lorries with aid are piling out on the Egyptian side. The US president will visit Israel tomorrow in a show of solidarity as fears grow the war in Gaza could engulf the Middle East. His visit was announced by the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken after several days of shuttle diplomacy in the region. Biden's expected to urge the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to minimise civilian casualties and to establish a humanitarian corridor out of Gaza. He'll also meet Arab leaders in an effort to stop the conflict spreading. Egypt is to host a summit to discuss the conflict on Saturday. Iran, meanwhile, has pledged to take preemptive action against Israel in the coming hours. Police in Brussels have shot dead a gunman suspected of killing 2 Swedish people last night. It happened in the city centre ahead of Belgium's Euro 2024 qualifier against Sweden. The suspect fired shots from an assault rifle at a taxi. The 45-year-old man who claimed responsibility in an online video identified himself as a member of Islamic State. Belgium's Prime Minister, Alexander De Croo, says terrorists cannot be allowed to succeed.
Attackers want to seed fear, distrust and division in our free society. Terrorists have to understand that they will never succeed in this mission. They will never subdue our free society. With their hate and violence, they show above all their powerlessness. Terrorism will never beat us.
Wages are now rising faster than prices for the first time in nearly 2 years. Average regular earnings increased 7.8% in the 3 months to August. The Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, says it's good news inflation is falling and the government will continue its efforts to halve inflation. Labour's Shadow Chancellor, though, says the Conservatives are leaving working people worse off with low growth and high taxes. Rolls-Royce is planning to cut up to 2,500 jobs worldwide. The company says it aims to become a more streamlined and efficient business through the process. Rolls-Royce currently employs 42,000 people, with about half of those in the UK. And yellow weather warnings for wind and rain will be in place from tomorrow onwards with the arrival of storm Babet. It's the second named storm of the season and it will last until Saturday. The Met Office is warning of potential flooding, power cuts and travel disruption. It will cover much of Scotland, the eastern part of Northern Ireland, as well as the north and east of England. We are live across the UK, on TV, on digital radio, and if you want us on your smart speaker, just say play GB News. Now it's back to Emily and Bev.
Good morning, it's 11:05. Police in Brussels have shot a man after a massive manhunt for the gunman who killed 2 Swedish nationals on Monday evening.
Yes, the man was shot in a cafe in the Sherbrooke neighbourhood, a local media has reported.
Brussels has been on its highest terror alert after Monday's attack, and we're joined now by Dr. Alan Mendoza, who's the Executive Director at the Henry Jackson Society. Good morning, Alan. Good to see you. I was just saying earlier there was a terrible inevitability about this attack in Brussels. I think we've all been on tenterhooks since the weekend to see if there would be an Islamic-inspired attack upon Westerners. How did you receive the news?
Well, yes, I'm afraid, unfortunately, it was to be expected. And you'll know before this attack even, although this was in Belgium, France had already gone to a very high terror alert because of the stabbing of a teacher, which wasn't necessarily linked, but was, linked in a way because of the origin of the attack. And it was only inevitable that this would occur elsewhere. And I think many European countries now have raised terror levels on the grounds that they fear some kind of Islamist attack on other targets. And this was, of course, a completely unprovoked target. 2 football fans shot dead. So anything could occur. And I think the European authorities in different countries are gearing up to more such incidents.
I want to know your opinion, Alan, on the BBC's position on this, because when this story broke last night, they very quickly put on their website that it was a terror attack after these 2 people were killed. It was brought to the attention of the BBC that they hadn't called the Hamas attack terror-related when 1,300 Jewish people had been murdered. What's your take on that particular position of the BBC?
Well, I think it's extraordinary what the BBC did, having spent nearly 2 weeks now arguing that a blatant terrorist atrocity in Israel was not terrorism, claiming it was just sort of they had to remain neutral. Within seconds of this terrorist attack occurring, they were very happy to use the term terror in the title of their piece. It seems to me the BBC have very grave questions to answer about what their real position is on these subjects, and indeed questions about their neutrality or otherwise, and why they would take a side when Jewish victims are involved, when they wouldn't do and haven't done in the past when it's anyone else, basically.
Alan, we know a little bit about the suspect in last night's terror attack. The Prime Minister in Belgium has said the suspect's a man of Tunisian origin. We believe him to be 45 years old. He had been living in the country illegally. He unsuccessfully sought asylum in Belgium back in November 2019. And it seems as though he's been living illegally in Belgium and then has committed this most awful offence. A video is also circulating online where he claimed himself as a member of Islamic State. Is there a pattern emerging in terms of someone who unsuccessfully sought asylum and then went on to commit such an act?
Well, we've always known that this is a possibility. We've always known that if you are unable to track who is in your country, unable to sort of scan them and understand where they are, and crucially, by the way, lose them once they have had their asylum denied, as happened in the case in the UK, if you recall, in Liverpool, when mercifully nobody got killed. But clearly, it was another such example. What you end up with is an obvious threat, an obvious national security threat. It's why we have been arguing for some time that the whole asylum process needs to be managed much more carefully, much more rigorously, why there is obviously a clamour within government to get control of it, because it's not simply an issue when it comes to sort of economics and development and issues like that. It's also a national security one. You just don't know who's coming in, what they might believe, and indeed what terrible things they might commit in the pursuit of a twisted ideology.
Now, Alan, you're an expert on Islamist terrorism. Your think tank does huge amounts of research into this. Of course, you can't speak to this particular suspect and this particular terrorist attack, but what is the ideology behind what we see when we see Islamist-inspired terrorist attacks on the West?
Well, I can speak to this a little bit for this attack because we've had some detailing. It appears the authorities, know that he was inspired by ISIS, and felt he was acting as a soldier for ISIS, as it were. He was radicalized by watching things online. Essentially, what you see here are people who believe that by committing acts of violence against non-believers, they are somehow hastening the advance of the global caliphate. Basically, that's what we're talking about when it comes to ISIS-style ideology. And they also want to commit atrocities in order to, I suppose, strike fear into the hearts of the non-believers in order to, again, ensure that their twisted ideology gains strength. And the last reason for doing it is they tend to receive adherents, would you believe, for these sorts of crimes. If they're publicised in the right way as far as terrorists are concerned, they get other people volunteering and being inspired by it to commit more crimes. So it's one of these awful, vicious circles where the more it happens, the more it will still happen yet more. And that's why it's always a challenge for the security services to stay on top of it and to stop even one atrocity happening, because if one happens, you can be sure that, like buses, unfortunately, others will be inspired to follow, and there'll be others as well behind them.
OK, thank you, Dr. Ellen Mendoza there, the Executive Director at the Henry Jackson Society. And this number of lives lost, let me tell you what the latest that's being reported is that at least 2,808 people were killed by Israeli attacks in Gaza, while more than 1,400 people were killed in Israel over the last week or so now. Back to the war now. Let's go over to Charlie Peters, who is in Tel Aviv. We know that 13-year-old Yahel on the right of the picture. No, we're going to bring you those images in a minute. Charlie, what is the very latest there for people who might just be tuning in at 11:15?
Sure, well, there was a lot of activity on the Gaza Strip last night from the IDF, who said this morning that they bombed hundreds of military capabilities across the Strip, from Gaza City in the north and also to Yunus Khan in the south, near to Rafah, where that border crossing is with Egypt. And this morning we heard reports from the Gaza Strip that some 49 people had been killed in those strikes in the south, and it comes soon after the IDF told all civilians in the north of the Gaza Strip to head south. 1.1 million people moving in that direction. The UN said that such a demand was impossible, and the International Red Cross said it was untenable and would cause death. There are plenty of people in the north, like children in hospitals and the elderly who cannot move, who are saying that there's no point in them leaving North Gaza and going to the south if the IDF are still continuing to strike those locations in the south as well. Why would they risk life and limb to move to an even more or just as dangerous situation in the south? And this comes as this morning, Lieutenant Colonel Richard Hecht, a IDF spokesman, said that while there is so much conversation about an imminent ground invasion, they could do something else. So the first time we've heard the IDF casting some form of doubt on what their next military operation will be. We have seen footage of the Lieutenant General Herzi Halevi, the IDF Chief of Staff, meeting with troops, telling them, are you ready? Asking them if they're prepared for their mission as they gather on that large convoy on the south of the country. Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister, has delivered similar briefings when meeting with soldiers on the south, asking them if are they ready for what's coming next, and they reply saying that they are. But what will come next is yet to be seen, because that ground invasion, if it does come, will be slow and deliberate and extremely brutal and violent. If it does occur, thousands of lives will almost certainly be lost in street fighting, hand-to-hand, through the north of Gaza, where hundreds of thousands of civilians are likely to remain amid that dire humanitarian situation. But there is also further crises in the north, as last night more rockets were fired from Lebanese Hezbollah onto IDF positions in northern Israel, and the IDF said that they struck Lebanese terrorists in the south of the Lebanese territories there as they tried to plant an explosive device on the border. So disintegrating and escalating situations at both ends of this country at war.
OK, thank you very much, Charlie, there in Tel Aviv. So, retired... What do we call you? Retired General Chip Chapman? Former counter... You're not retired, you're here working with us, Chip, aren't you?
I am at the moment.
Former head of counter-terrorism. We had Liam Halligan in the studio earlier talking about the oil prices. Now, this is how it might affect people in this country this winter if our fuel prices go up. And Liam told us this fascinating insight into the fact that 20% of the world's oil goes through the Straits of Hormuz, which we're looking at here. He called it the throat of the global economy, Chip. It's this vulnerable pinch point, and that if Iran closes the Straits of Hormuz, that would have huge implications for us. Are they likely to do that, and how easy is it?
I would say it's unlikely, and I would say that from a geopolitical perspective, and that is really to do with, in March this year, there was a rapprochement supposedly between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and that was brokered by China. The big consumer of Iranian oil and oil coming out through the Strait of Hormuz, it's not the Straits, it's the Strait, is not the US, it's China and Asia. So the implication for that on the Chinese economy would be far more serious than the US economy. I think money would flow from the yuan, the currency of China, into America, giving America an even greater GDP. So from a geopolitical perspective, it's unlikely. However, 30 years ago, we used to talk about geoeconomic theories and that the intertwined world meant that we'd never go to war again. It turns out that the leaders of the world are not accountants. They look at power and how that might be readied. If they were to mind that, that would be seen probably as an act of war by most of the Gulf states and probably America. You can actually put a safe lane through there, and in Bahrain is a significant British naval fleet presence, which includes 4 mine countermeasures vehicles alongside the American 5th Fleet. Similarly, in Qatar, there's Al Udeid Air Base with a lot of significant American air power there. So it is still unlikely that they would do that. Is it inevitable? No. Could it change? Of course it could, depending on what happens in the next week.
Very interesting to get your perspective on that. Shall we talk now about those missing in Gaza, hostages from Israel? We learnt this morning that a British teenager who had gone missing has now been confirmed as murdered. How does Israel, how does the British services too get back missing hostages?
Well, when you have a hostage situation, if you were to take, for example, which we won't in this case, but if there was an airline, for example, if you're special forces, you have to provide to the government, because it's always a political decision to go in, an immediate response. And the immediate response means that the likelihood of success is lower, both in terms of the hostage being killed and the casualties to friendly forces, your soldiers. Then you work up a deliberate response. But the deliberate response is based upon getting more intelligence as time goes on, and you can do that either through human intelligence sources, technical intelligence, and at the moment we've got a longer soak period to give the Israelis a chance to do that. Now, one of the significant problems is if you've got somewhere like 200 hostages, and we assume they're separated into various small groups, that is a huge number of targets which you have to try and develop the information on to go and rescue them. It is possible to do it, but if you go and you're successful on 1 or 2, what is going to be the impact on the others from Hamas's perspective, who haven't really been great in international humanitarian law at the moment?
It was interesting to hear yesterday, Chip, about the network of tunnels which is beneath Gaza. How does that complicate the rescue operation? It complicates it hugely because you've got to get access to the tunnels. Now, it's the proliferation of the tunnels, really, which is the big problem. So in the 2021 campaign, which was largely an air campaign, the Israelis supposedly took out 100 kilometres of tunnels. Now, there were supposed to be 500 kilometres of tunnels in Gaza. Now, the Israelis, again, did have, and I think still do, largely technical capabilities to find, locate and deal with these. But one of the trade-offs in the sword versus shield is that Hamas have dug these ever deeper to try and negate the technical capabilities of the Israelis.
Also, when it comes to the negotiation of getting hostages back from Gaza to Israel, in the past, am I right in thinking that it's been, well, not quid pro quo, but essentially we'll give you back one Israeli if you give us thousands from your territory? Because that's what's happened in the past. Is there some kind of negotiation going on currently?
Well, there is, and I think that's been brokered by the Qataris. But one of the certainly tactical objectives, I think, of Hamas was to release all the Palestinian prisoners being held in Israeli incarceration. Now, their track record of how many you give up for Israelis versus Palestinians has not been great. And of course, it is a big leverage for the Hamas. The hostages is big leverage.
OK. All right. Thank you, Chip. Chip Chapman there, former head of counter-terrorism.
Thank you.
So, still to come. It's been the SNP party conference this week.
Has it?
Nobody really noticed, did they? Maybe you did notice if you live in Scotland. Well, we're going to be asking after the break about whether Scots can trust themselves, and as they've been asked to do by the leader of the SNP, or do they put their trust in the SNP? Are they bringing real change? That's what they're being asked. Do you think they're bringing real change?
Well, we'll see. See what our guests think. Anyway, you're with Britain's Newsroom. We're on GB News.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the dinosaur hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
And Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Put in your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good morning. We are now looking at scenes from Gaza, I believe. As you can see in the distance, there are plumes of what appears to be smoke from an explosion or two, perhaps, in the far corner of that picture in the distance. We'll keep you up to date with Charlie Peters will be with us all day live from Tel Aviv to give you the very, very latest on the Israel-Gaza war.
OK, moving on to issues a little closer to home now. It's the third and final day of the SNP conference.
Yes, Stephen Flynn opened the SNP conference in Aberdeen this week with a message that his party is the only one offering real change in Scotland. Do the Scottish people feel the same?
So we're going to be joined now to answer this question by former Conservative MSP Brian Monteith and former Glasgow SNP councillor Austin Sheridan. Good to see you both again, gentlemen. Let me start with you, Brian. Do the SNP offer change? Brian, I don't know whether you can hear us. We're asking, do the SNP offer change for the Scottish people? Oh. I'm not sure whether Brian can hear us. Austin, if you can hear me, then please do jump in with that answer to that question. Go on, Austin.
Yeah, of course the SNP are offering no change to the Scottish people. So, for example, our policies in the next Westminster election will be surrounding things around the two-child cap, making sure we can push to abolish the rape clause. Other things that we'll be looking at would be to respect Scotland's democratic right to choose our own future. It's pretty clear that the Tories are clear on these issues. I think it's clear that the Tories are going to be set to lose the election. What isn't clear is exactly what the Labour Party intends to do differently. But certainly for us in Scotland, then the SNP will be setting out our stall for change, and that is what we will aim to deliver off the back of a successful Westminster result and next year, and that's what we were working towards.
Austin, why do you think support for the SNP is on the downward trajectory?
Well, support for all political parties will fluctuate, but the most recent opinion polls still show the SNP are in the lead after 16 years in government. I would say that is very, very good. However, they have taken a dip. There is no doubt that the SNP has been through some difficult times, recently. That you would be. You would be silly not to admit that. However, we do have about a year till the next electoral test for the SNP, and we are confident that come that election we'll publish a manifesto and we will be campaigning for real, meaningful change, just like what we have been delivering within our devolved administration, such as, for example, the Scottish Child Payment, which is a benefit that is only available in Scotland. A great example is Scotland and the SNP using our devolved powers in order to help the poorest people in our society, and that's what we'll be focused on come the next election.
Brian, I hope hopefully you can hear us now. Nicola Sturgeon reacted fairly angrily to the accusation that she was Liz Truss for the SNP, in that she arrived at the conference and like Liz Truss in Manchester, she threatened to overshadow the leader, in your case, in the case of the SNP, Humza Yousaf. Do you think it's a fair analogy?
Yes, I think it was a fair analogy. We all know that Nicola Sturgeon disliked being told by Liz Truss that she was an attention seeker, and yet what we saw yesterday was Nicola Sturgeon, rather than letting the First Minister, Humza Yousaf, have all the attention, she actually stole the attention. She sought to bounce herself into the conference, giving him short notice of 24 hours that she was coming, and take the glory and attention away from him. I think he must have been reeling from that privately, and all it does is expose the divisions behind the leadership of the SNP, where there's still unsettlement about the deal with the Greens. There's still a rejection by many people of the way Mr. Yousaf's leading the SNP, and a belief that they will go into a general election divided. And divided parties never do well in elections, whatever their makeup is. So that is the big problem that the First Minister faces, uniting his party when they can't even really agree their strategy.
I mean, Brian, a pretty terrible result for the Conservatives when it came to the Rutherglen and Hamilton West by-election. 3.9% of the vote share, down 11% since 2019. Conservatives due for a wipeout.
Well, I don't think I can speak for the Conservatives on this, but what I think is fairly obvious that any Conservatives that I've read about were actually choosing to vote Labour. There's a great deal of tactical voting goes on in by-elections, depending on who's holding the seat. and who's best placed to defeat the incumbent. And I've no doubt that many people who might have voted Conservative, or indeed a Liberal Democrat or for other parties, saw it as an opportunity to reprimand the SNP for its conduct in government. These by-elections don't happen very often in Scotland, but this was certainly a seminal one for Labour to break through. But they obviously got some help from disillusioned SNP voters and tactical voters from other parties.
OK. Gentlemen, Brian Monteith, Austin Sheridan, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Right, still to come. Brussels shooting. The gunman who killed 2 people was already known to police and was staying in Belgium illegally.
Yes, there's heightened security with the terror threat in Brussels remaining very high.
Also this morning, online exams. Pupils in England could soon take GCSE and A-level exams on computers, I guess rather than with pen and paper, under new plans for teenagers to study at least one major subject digitally by 2030. That and much more still to come after your morning's news with Aaron.
It's 11:31. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB Newsroom. A British teenager who's been missing since last weekend's attacks by Hamas has been confirmed dead. 13-year-old Yael, on the right of your picture, was killed when gunmen attacked her kibbutz on the 7th of October. Yael died along with her mother Leanne. Her elder sister Noya and their father Eli are still missing. The Prime Minister has called for the immediate release of hostages. It's thought another 9 Britons are amongst some 200 people being held by Hamas. At least 60 people have been killed by Israeli airstrikes in southern Gaza overnight as aid agencies warn of an escalating humanitarian crisis. Palestinian authorities say the attacks took place in Yunus Khan and at the Rafah crossing in the south of the enclave, where the Israeli military has told civilians to take refuge. The World Health Organization says at least 2,800 people have now been killed in Gaza and 11,000 people injured, almost half of those women and children. The United Nations says hospitals in Gaza are on the verge of collapse. Its aid workers are overwhelmed and supplies are running out as that Rafah border crossing to Egypt remains closed. Police in Brussels have shot dead a gunman suspected of killing 2 Swedish people last night. It happened in the city centre before Belgium's Euro 2020 qualifier against Sweden. The suspect fired shots from an assault rifle at a taxi. The 45-year-old man has claimed responsibility in an online video. He identified himself as a member of Islamic State. The terror threat has been raised in Brussels to its highest level. And wages are now rising faster than prices for the first time in nearly 2 years. Average regular earnings are up 7.8% in the 3 months to August. The Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, says it's good news that inflation is falling and says the government will continue its pledge to cut inflation in half. Labour, though, say the Conservatives are leaving people worse off with low growth and high taxes. I'll be back with more at the top of the next hour, or more details on all of our stories on our website, gbnews.com.
For exclusive, limited edition and rare gold coins that are always newsworthy, Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Quick check on the markets. The pound buys you $1.2172 and €1.1526. The price of gold, £1,582.51 per ounce. And the FTSE 100 is at 7,657 points.
Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to ordinary people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening.
from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the live desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
It is 11:38. Good morning. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with me, Emily Carver, and of course, Bev Turner.
Andrew Pearce is just taking a few days off, just to let you know he is absolutely fine.
He's coming back.
He will be back. He will be back. Right, Scarlett Maguire and Tanya Buxton are back with us in the studio. We have to turn first to Israel. Tanya, British teenager who went missing after the Hamas attack at the weekend, Yahel, 13, has now been confirmed that she's lost her life. Just so sad when we're seeing these pictures.
It's horrifying. It's just horrifying. Can you imagine sitting there, being their family, waiting to find out? I mean, the horror of those hostages being taken, especially young girls, especially with the kind of playbook that these terrorists have when it comes to women. It doesn't bear thinking about it. Look, I'm stuttering. Listen to me. I can't get the words out because I'm so disturbed by it all.
Well, let's be clear. She's been murdered.
Yes.
And her sister and her father are still missing. Her British-born mother, Leanne, also killed. Devastating. Rishi Sunak said just on Monday, yesterday, that at least 6 British citizens have died. Tragic.
Do you, at times like this, Tanya, do you just sort of have to rely on the fact that we have counter-terrorism intelligence services in this country who are keeping us safe here?
We have to do that because, contrary to what I said, we have to carry on living because that is what they want. The terrorists want us to live in terror, to make our lives small and to be frightened of everything. So we have to counter that and live our lives fully and stand up to terror because there's no way that we can continue living with it. We have to stand up to it. And even now we know that people that are on social media, if you're standing up for Israel, you get called all these terrible names So there's no nuance in any of it anymore. I'm just sick to death of it. I can stand up for Israel and still be horrified by what's going on in Gaza at the moment.
I really worry that some Muslim youth in this country will be radicalised by what they're seeing in the Middle East, Scarlett.
Oh, I think you're right, and I think everybody's really worried about it. I mean, what's so terrible actually is that Tell Mama, which is this sort of anti-Islamophobia thing. I mean, they've put on their news bulletins that anti-Semitic and anti-Islamophobic attacks have risen, and anti-Islam attacks have tripled since it happened. I mean, so
in this country.
I mean, obviously, what's happened abroad, and actually, I mean, that's what's so terrible is of course, if you say that what happened. I mean, it's just a statement of fact that what happened in Israel was absolutely appalling, unforgivable, and you cannot in any way excuse it, right? But saying that, as Tonya said, does not mean that you say that, oh, yeah, then it's OK to kill the Palestinians. I mean, as the deputy guy from the United Nations said, you can have both things at the same time. You can be absolutely appalled at the attack on Israel, and you can still say that what's happening in Gaza is terrible.
I guess it's of course it's very difficult, very complicated, and people have grievances going back decades in this particular conflict in this part of the world. But it's incredibly difficult, isn't it? Because people say Israel must show restraint. Now, what does a reasonable response to a terror attack?
This is it. This is the question.
The biggest they've seen in their history.
And no one can answer that question. And, you know, you ask Palestinian journalists that question, or you ask Palestinians, OK, so this is what's happened. This massacre, it was a massacre, has happened. What is a reasonable response then from Israel? And not even the Palestinians can come up with an answer for that. And, you know, they were babies and young girls, and it was just so demonic the way they behaved. How do you deal with demons in that way?
And particularly when we know Hamas is very much embedded in where civilians are, and they can use civilians as human shields.
They're holding their own people. The problem is that Hamas cares not a jot for Palestinians. That's the big point, isn't it? That Hamas is slaughtering. They are the slaughterers of Palestinians. They are doing this.
They knew absolutely. I mean, what they did in Israel was, as I said, absolutely appalling. But they knew what Israel would do. Absolutely. They knew that by doing it, that they were they were not just putting their citizens at risk, they were absolutely condemning them to die.
Yes, the reign of terror would be put on them.
No question about that. And actually, long before, so all Hamas's rocket attacks, I mean, round that area, there aren't just Israeli villages, there are Arab villages. The Arab villages don't have any, they don't have anywhere to go. I mean, Arabs have been killed by Hamas rockets for decades. I mean, let us not kid each other. I mean, Hamas are appalling.
Yes, that's right. They are terrorists, which still blows my mind. Have the BBC called them terrorists or not yet?
No, still not yet.
It's disgusting.
The BBC are now saying that some governments, including the British government, assign as or ascribe to be a terrorist organisation. They are still using rather convoluted words.
It's time to defund them.
What sounds a bit like excusing.
Well, a lot of people would agree with you on that one.
Yeah.
Well, actually,
let's move on.
Can I just say that the BBC, I think, have had more complaints than ever, but they are absolutely split down the middle of what the complaint is against.
Sensible and stupid.
No, not sensible and stupid. Is some say they're too pro-Israel and some say they're too pro-Hamas. So actually, the BBC are in the firing line from everybody.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that they are unbiased.
Right.
Should we move on, please, to more domestic issues? School exams. This is interesting. Story. Yeah. This is interesting. So pupils in England could soon be taking their GCSEs and A-levels, Tonya, entirely on a computer, on a laptop, rather than with pen and pen and paper. Does that matter?
Well, it does. Shall I tell you why? So I've got a 16-year-old, and he has just done his GCSEs, and he had real issues because he loves English and he loves literature, but because he doesn't write fast enough, he was really worried about his grade because he didn't have enough time to get it down because he never writes anymore. Everything's done on computer, so actually it does hinder them to have to write again. I mean, I don't want to lose the beautiful art of writing, but kids don't use it anymore.
What do you think, Scarlett?
Yeah, I agree. My worry is where's the money going to come from? I mean,
for all the laptops,
we are
all
the laptops. Absolutely. I mean, we've got to have school laptops.
Yeah.
I mean, and it would be wrong to bring in your own for all sorts of free. So we've got to have school laptops that are empty, so that you just go on them. Everyone has got to be the same. And then you think, people like me get technical problems. I mean, I know the young don't, but actually things go wrong.
But I wonder whether there's something else that we miss when we don't use a pen and paper. You'll see on this show, I always have pen and paper. Youngsters like Emily do it all on their computer. But there's something about the cognitive process for me. Maybe it's a lifetime of always writing and being at university and taking notes in lectures.
You have to be smarter to be able to do it with pen and paper because you can't go back and delete bits and edit bits. It's much more difficult. It's actually more of a test of perhaps intelligence.
Well, that's... I don't think I
you can't go back
prove
and
that
remove,
point.
Yeah. You know, you can't go back in the same way.
But for me, I remember things if I write them down, Scarlett. I don't remember it if I type it.
Oh, no, well, actually, I remember both. But, I mean, I do think... I mean, there is no question that the young... barely would. I mean, they do not use a pen and paper. That if you give them a shopping list, they put it down. They find. I mean, I remember some years ago, the Daily Mail did a thing about how to tell if you're old, and number one is, do you write things down?
Thanks a lot. You really made my day there, Scarlett. Thank you so much for that observation.
Perhaps the option will be given because I imagine it might open the door to some cheating.
With the laptop?
Yes, that's what we were saying. But I think there was what the young producers out here, Joseph, was saying is that there'll be laptops that actually don't have anything on them. You have to, in order to join, to be able to work it, you put in a certain programme that has no access to anything else.
But then what are you actually testing? Because actually, if you have children who already have learning needs... so one of my children isn't great. She's quite dyslexic and she struggles. So she already uses a laptop in exam situations, and she can get 1,000 words down. Whereas if you got, like your son, if you asked her to use a pen and paper, there's something about that cognitive skill of forming the words that takes so much of her brain power that it's not worth it, and she does do it on a laptop.
No, absolutely, because what we want to know about your daughter is not can she form letters, but actually what does she know? And Joseph, who was talking to us, had to, because he's left-handed and his writing was appalling, that's why he had to do his exams on a laptop. And actually, it is right. I mean, it's right that one should level the playing field. And it is just interesting because I remember not so long ago that I think it was the Campaign for Real Education was completely opposed to computers because they didn't understand that they were the future.
But what I do worry about is a future in which you can only ever get down your information if you have electricity. Is that your stomach rumbling? That you can only ever get information down out of your head if you have electricity because batteries go flat. This never goes flat.
Oh, mine runs out of ink.
Oh, you might run out of ink. Thank you, Scarlett.
So old school. That's real old school.
Bed bugs.
We must move on to bed bugs because the plague is spreading. Tonya.
Well, it's coming from France. Why don't they sort it out?
Coming over here, invading our beds.
Invading our beds. Stealing our mattresses. Exactly that. It's such a horror. I mean, at one stage, we thought that we might have bed bugs in our house because my son, my youngest, insists on buying everything he buys is from second-hand stores.
Yeah.
So the rule is if you buy it, it's got to go in the freezer for 24 hours. And then I'll wash it.
Not the bed.
No, whatever they buy. Whatever they buy.
Clothes even.
So if you buy
what makes a freezer?
Well, it's only like a jumper. There's room for that. So, they put it in the freezer for 24 hours. That'll freeze off the bed bugs. Then you wash it and then you can put it into his room. But he can do that. And once you have bed bugs, it is a horror. It's a horror. Because we live with soft furnishings everywhere now. So it doesn't just go into the bedroom. It goes all over your house. It is a nightmare. We've really got to do something about it.
You have to fumigate your whole house, don't you?
There was a Kosovan family staying with me, and the man thought that he had bed bugs. So he got in. I mean, he then moved out and got in the fumigators into my house. I mean, it cost £400. That he went up and down, up and down. I mean, it was very funny because his wife said, first of all, you know, this is ridiculous. I was sharing a bed with you and I don't have them. And then when I said that, actually all my friends said that they'd probably brought them in. And she went, that's just because we're third world developing. I said, no. And then we had to have them back. I mean, Tonya's right. And then you just, everything, you think, is this bed bugs?
That sounds rather awkward. Who brought in the bed bugs?
I know.
Here before we came.
I know.
It's very uncomfortable in that way. But they're saying they're coming in suitcases as well, not just, you know, on clothing through
I'm
passengers.
feeling itchy now.
Yeah, you inevitably start itching, don't you?
You can get them. You can a lot of them. You get them on suitcases in the hold of planes. I mean, it really is. Bed bugs are awful. But then you get to the stage of thinking, is this a bed bug? You know, anything that happens.
Yes, anything that happens.
We just slight gear change here, live, you know, news programme. This is what we do. We've got Charlie Peters out in Israel. We want to bring you some live pictures from Gaza here. There appears to be clouds of smoke. Perhaps we're looking at the skyline there, and of course the ocean to the left of your picture there. We're just, I guess, we're reflecting here this morning on the incredibly tense situation over in Gaza. We know that people have been asked to leave via the south by the Israelis. We don't know entirely how successful that evacuation of civilians is proving at the moment.
I mean, yesterday there was talk of a potential ceasefire, but as we can see from these pictures, continued bombardment, continued explosions by the looks of things, targeted strikes in Gaza by the Israeli forces. They'll be targeting military bases where they believe they've got intelligence to say that Hamas is situated. But, of course, as we've seen, there will be civilian casualties too. So we'll keep you very much up to date on what's going on.
And, of course, what we're seeing here is above ground in Gaza. But as we've learnt over the last couple of days, there is a network of tunnels beneath this area, which is about 300 kilometres, if my memory serves me correctly, in which Hamas fighters could be hiding, could be obviously placing devices to detonate if Israeli soldiers decide to invade on foot to try and root out the Hamas terrorists.
I think someone told us that the tunnels are longer than the tube network, or they spread for further than that. So that's a massive length there of tunnelling.
Just an awful situation. You must stay with GB News all day because, of course, we will be going back to Charlie Peters. The situation is incredibly tense, and, of course, the domino effects of what happens today could very much impact upon us here in the UK. Up next, we've got the live desk with Mark Longhurst and Pip Thompson. Pip is with us now. Good afternoon, Pip. Great to see you. What are you going to be covering until 3 o'clock?
Well, we'll be telling you all about how there could possibly be a glimmer of hope for the captured hostages in Gaza because Turkey says it is in talks with Hamas over releasing them. Their foreign minister says he has spoken to the terrorist group's leader. President Biden, he's preparing to fly to Israel and Jordan for crisis talks tomorrow as Iran has issued that chilling warning that it could take action in hours if Gaza continues to be bombed. We'll also be bringing you the very latest from Brussels, where their terror alert is at the highest level after police shot dead a gunman who killed 2 Swedish nationals in the city. And also, SNP conference, the final day, will be live from there. What announcements is its leader going to be making?
So we've come to the end of our show this morning. Thank you to all of our guests, Scarlett Maguire and Tonya Buxton, also at the end of the programme. And thank you to everybody who's contributed. Thank you to you at home as well for keeping us company.
Yes, Newsroom will be back tomorrow at 9:30. You're with GB News, the People's Channel. Stay with us.
Alex Deakin here with your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. For many, a fine day today, but the weather is on the turn. Some very heavy rain heading our way later this week. It's also going to turn windy thanks to Storm Babet, working its way slowly northwards across the Bay of Biscay, really showing its hand tomorrow. But it's as it pushes further north during Wednesday night and Thursday, and then into Friday, that we're going to see some very heavy rain, and there are a number of Met Office warnings in force. Back to today, because as I said, for many it's a fine day out there. The cloud very thick across southwest England and South Wales, and quite gusty winds developing too now across parts of Wales and southwest England. Later today we'll see some rain heading towards Northern Ireland. But for many it's dry, it's bright. Temperatures a little higher than yesterday, still on the cool side though, especially with those winds across the south and the west. They'll continue to strengthen a little this evening, and the rain will work its way for a time across parts of Northern Ireland. Nothing too heavy at this stage. For many elsewhere it'll stay dry overnight. Those winds starting to pick up a little coming in from the North Sea, and into Wednesday we'll see those winds strengthening further. Still many eastern areas dry again tomorrow. Further west though, that rain getting heavier and heavier as storm Babet starts to influence things. Please do check out the Met Office website for the latest warnings and stay up to date through the next few days, because there's some very heavy rain on the way and some strong and gusty winds. Bye for now.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you.